And
Good
mute
evening,
everyone.
everybody. Oh yes, mute everyone. Hold on.
Oh, yes.
Mute all. Okay. Let Irene in. Okay. Right, I'll start again. Welcome to yet another Nearly Shabbat on the Hill. It's now just about a year since we started the first Nearly Shabbat on the Hill, and we're still going. We've still got wonderful speakers, and we've still got a wonderful audience. So thank you to all of you who've stuck with us through a year of pandemic. Thank you to Rabbi David and to Beth for finding lots of wonderful speakers. Tonight, I'm delighted to be welcoming my very old friend, old in that we've known each other a long time. He's not old, he's the same age as me, David Allard. We've known each other for 35 years. He's known my wife for over 50 years now. And he's going to be talking to us about his experiences on kibbutz in the Yom Kippur War and what it was like living in Israel during those few days. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say welcome to David. I'm going to share my screen. And somebody tell me that they can see this. Okay. Thumbs up that you can see it, somebody? Yup, great. And David, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my story. I will read most of this because I otherwise will go meandering off into the distance. You don't need that. I'm sure you can all recall where you were and exactly what you were doing on the 11th of September 2001, 19 years ago, 19 and a half, now known as 9/11, when all the world changed for all of us. I'd like to talk about another day when my whole world changed, well before 9/11, on the 5th of October, 1973. I made Aliyah to kibbutz Machanaim in the Upper Galilee, a few miles north of Lake Kinneret, in November 1972. Fresh out of university, a long-haired student, half hippie, and definitely a socialist. Next slide, please. You can see here where my kibbutz was. About 3 miles east of the River Jordan, which before the Six-Day War in 1967 was the border with Syria, the River Jordan. I'm sure many of you know that. And the next slide, please. Now, the kibbutz was shelled by the Syrians during the Six-Day War. It was badly placed in the strategic sense, as it was and still is, close to a very important crossroads that leads up onto the Golan and just beside an airstrip. After the Six-Day War, the border with Syria moved about 20 miles east to the edge of the Golan Heights, much further away. You could say that the inhabitants of the kibbutz now felt safer, but in the end, as you will hear, this did not turn out to be exactly true. And we can see what a beautiful area it is. You can see here the Chula Valley, and behind it, the beginning of the Golan Heights. Next slide, please. Here's the road that led to my kibbutz, surrounded on both sides by eucalyptus trees, very characteristic of, well, a great number of places in Israel, but especially where I lived. I was by no means the only British Jew to settle on kibbutz Machanaim. There was a special connection to a very prosperous man from Wimbledon, whose 2 children had also settled on the kibbutz. He helped a lot financially, contributing money for the kibbutz. Next slide, please. To build a lovely swimming pool and a central building, which you can see on the left behind the playground, the communal dining room, and behind it, the kibbutz offices. Next slide, please. It was very strange. You may be asking, what is this doing? Well, it was very strange for me to change from being a long-haired student to becoming a dairy farmer, getting up at 4:30 in the morning, shivering in the cold winter, as opposed to going to bed at 4:30 in the morning when I was a student. Why so early? Well, this early rise was to prepare the herd of 100 or so Frisian cows for a 6 a.m. milking, the first of 3 daily milkings. Next slide, please. You can see here the tools of the trade, and you can imagine that clumping around in Wellington boots through cow dung took some getting used to. So did washing down each of the cows' bits to make sure they were clean. It was such a struggle at first to lift those milking clusters and then nervously clamp them to the cow's teats. Would a cow kick me, annoyed at my clumsiness? Next slide, please. By October 1973, nearly a year later, I was much stronger, fitter, and had settled in very happily, working hard every day, a farmer, no longer exactly a youngster from northwest London. Well, as you can see, the main crop of the kibbutz were apples, acres of trees whose fruit was picked between July and October. That year, 1973, was a bumper crop, and we all worked extra hours to bring the apples in. Next, please. So, it's Yom Kippur 1973. It's a hot day, the summer is not yet over, and I'm not a good Jewish boy. I'm not going to synagogue, I'm not even fasting, I'm secular, and I'm waiting to go apple picking at the hottest time of day, just before 2 p.m. The adult kibbutzniks are having an afternoon siesta, or reading. The kibbutz children, and we can see some of them here, are by the swimming pool, or playing basketball, or chatting under the shade of eucalyptus trees. Next slide, please. Suddenly, there is a loud bang, and then another, and another. Enormous gouts of brown earth are thrown up in the air in a cotton field just past the swimming pool, near where the children and adults may be, or were. Now, nothing like this, of course, had ever happened to me before. Why would it? How could it? What on earth is going on? My first thought is disbelief. What in heaven's name is the Israeli army doing, conducting a military exercise in our fields on Yom Kippur of all days, and without even notifying us? I do not move, not yet. Within seconds, I see people running around. It looks like, well, a swarm of bees being disturbed. Someone calls out to me, "David, you idiot, find the bomb shelter." The kibbutz members, of course, remembered very well the shelling during the 6-Day War. And I hadn't been there. I was still a schoolboy taking A-levels. I know I should feel scared, but for some reason I don't. But everyone is running, so I do too. After all, it's a village, it's a community. Now, most of the kibbutz shelters are 10 feet underground. Next slide, please. You can see here they're built out of reinforced concrete and covered by a rocky dome. Funnily enough, the rocks had been shipped in from the Golan, as these shelters had been built after the 6-Day War. But the first shelter I can reach near my room is pre-1967. It is older, shallower, and only covered in earth. No rocks, no reinforced concrete. I scuttle down the steps to join others who are huddled there underground. So, the artillery shells start to fall fast, closer. Now they're falling inside the kibbutz. The explosions are louder. Huge clods of earth are pattering onto the shelter steps. This goes on for an hour and a half. It still feels unreal to me at the time. I've never experienced danger, nice Jewish boy from West Hampstead. The other people in the shelter look very scared to me. One girl is crying, and I keep wondering why I'm not afraid. I should be. It is a big shock to walk around the kibbutz once the shelling stops. Next slide, please. Lawns have been gouged out by the shells, rose bushes flung into the air. Branches from the trees are littering everywhere. Buildings have been hit, including, as you can see, the kibbutz offices and the dining room. It hits home now. The whole world has been turned upside down. It is nothing short of a miracle, we find out, that no one of the kibbutz has been injured or killed. Because by good fortune, as you know, the first shells had fallen in the fields outside the kibbutz, giving everyone just enough time to make it into the shelters. Some of the shelter doors had been locked and had to be kicked down. You can imagine. Next slide, please. At 2 p.m., as you all know, the Syrian army crossed the border, and tank battles ensue on the Golan until the IDF manages to stop the Syrian advance a short distance from the Jordan. At the same time, the Egyptian army has crossed the Suez Canal, a surprise attack. Next slide, please. We see here from the outside, again, the kibbutz offices. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. That's the back of the kibbutz dining room. It's the entrance to the kitchens. So now it is the evening of Yom Kippur, 1973. Now at night, you can usually see clumps of friendly lights of other kibbutzim and moshavim dotted around the Chula Valley and the Golan. Not anymore. All those little lights have gone out. On my kibbutz, the curtains have been drawn, the shutters closed, and the round lamps along the paths all through the kibbutz, ground lamps, little round glowing lights, have been switched off. It's blackout. We have to walk carefully by starlight as we get ready to sleep in the shelters. It's very confusing, very strange. Blackout. On the Golan, we can see the ominous glow of flames on the Golan. Sorry, repetition. It's the end of summer. Everything is dry. Everything has caught fire after the long summer heat, not least because of the battles between Israeli and Syrian tanks. It's night, the first night of the war. I can hear at the crossroads near the kibbutz tanks rumbling along the road going up to the Golan. Tank tracks, it's very, very different noise from a car going by or even a lorry. The whole ground shakes. I'm in the kibbutz dining room downstairs, and I'm a runner going to give out orders, not quite orders, but call-ups to miluimnikim, reservists. I am still British. I haven't been in the army. And here I suddenly see kibbutznikim, my chaverim, being called up. Now, usually at that time of year, they're in t-shirts and shorts. Now suddenly they're in uniform. Now suddenly they're carrying rifles. And off they go into the night. It occurs to me then that some of them may not come back, and others may spend weeks, months in hospital. I still don't quite believe it. Now, not everyone sleeps in the bomb shelters. I spent the first night of the war in a bomb shelter, and I found myself unable to sleep. It was too strange sharing this shelter with 12 other people on bunk beds. And also I discover I have a mild form of claustrophobia. So from the following night, I sleep in my room. Perhaps not the most sensible of decisions, but after all, we've been shelled and there's an end to it. The days pass in a blur. We're glued to the radio for every scrap of information we can obtain. During the day, Israeli fighter jets screech low over us, going up onto the Golan. Incredibly low, incredibly loud. And Miloimnikim, reservist soldiers, are camping out in our apple orchards and orange groves, waiting to be sent into battle. 100 yards or so, 200 yards from where we live. Now, in the second week of the war, I'm working the night shift with the dairy herd, with milking starting at 10 p.m. The cows are not aware there's a war going on. They still need to be milked 3 times a day. I have a partner in the milking, and it's a Vietnam War veteran called Gene Shaw. He has a big moustache and turns up every night for milking with a smile and a half-smoked cigar in his mouth, and a nickname for the woman who actually runs the dairy herd. He calls her the Dairy Queen. He is outrageously angry at having found himself unexpectedly in another war. I try to explain to him it's nothing personal. He says, they're trying to kill me. I said, it's nothing personal. They're trying to kill all of us. He is not amused. On the third evening of the second week of the war, we're milking the cows, and it's about 10:30. Suddenly there are loud bangs outside, more explosions, flashes of fire in the orchards and near the crossroads this time. Yes, the shelling has started again. Jean and I are almost certainly the only people awake in the kibbutz at that time. We swear a lot. I mean, really a lot. And quickly shut down the milking clusters and release the cows. I don't know, have any of you ever tried running in Wellington boots? I don't recommend it. We are, in fact, at the furthest possible point on the kibbutz from the nearest shelter. It may sound strange, but I can't help laughing as we run in our Wellington boots. It feels so absurd. This, as you can imagine, is not something that Jean appreciates, and there is more swearing. The shelling goes on for half an hour. We then return to work, consoling ourselves with the thought that it can't possibly ever happen again. We are wrong. The following night, just as we start the night milking, the explosions start again, and we run for it. When we reach the nearest shelter, Jean dashes down the stairs. I did last time, but this time I don't, because I am surprised to see 2 of the kibbutz vatikim, 2 of the kibbutz founders, Aaron and Gidi, comfortably seated on chairs on top of the shelter, both smoking a cigarette. Matem osim, ishtagatem? I say, what in hell are you doing? I ask in my best Ivrit. Are you crazy? Tiragat Sair, calm down, youngster. Aaron says, Tistakel al hashamayim mizracha. Watch the sky in the east. I sit down. Every now and then, a red light appears low in the eastern sky, moving in our direction. Now, young man, Gidi says, if that red glow is moving straight at us, we need to go straight down into the shelter. Well, what is it, I ask. They are Syrian artillery shells, moving so fast that the metal casing is heating up and it glows red. So far, the shells are still hitting the orange groves, and thanks God, there are no reservists there anymore. I go down into the shelter and ask Jean if he wants to join us. He has now concluded that I am utterly insane. I stay with Aaron and Gidi for a short time until the red glows stop, and then Jean and I go back to finish the milking for 10 minutes. And then it starts all over again. Back to the shelter, and this time I go straight in. By the time we finish the milking, it is 2 in the morning, and I am now, at long last, very jittery. I have a mental picture of the roof collapsing onto me in my bed in my room. And so, with all the logic of somebody who is very tired and very tense at 2 o'clock in the morning, I don't go into the shelter. I'm still claustrophobic. So I drag my mattress out onto the lawn and go to sleep on the grass, convinced that I will be much safer sleeping under the open sky. Well, later that morning, well after dawn, Moshe, another kibbutz founder, walks by my sleeping form and wakes me. Ma ta oseh? Sheina b'deshe? Ma pitom? What are you doing? Sleeping on the lawn? What the heck? He roars with laughter when I explain my fear. And believe me, that is the only laughter I hear during the war. To give one example, a very good friend of the time, Francine, an American woman, is so traumatized that she refuses to even leave the shelter for 1 minute until the war is over. 19 days. 19 days she stays in the shelter, and there are many others like her. When the pathway lamps come back on, and the lights come back on in the hula, after 19 days, it is the strangest, the loveliest, and the most wonderful sight. The war is over, the blackout has stopped, but nothing is ever the same after that for the state of Israel, which was caught by surprise. And there are over 2,000 dead soldiers, so many men of my age, with over 9,000 wounded. Good friends come back and tell their stories of their own narrow escapes, of death, of destruction, of maimed bodies. You might want to call it a miracle that no one from my kibbutz was injured or killed, neither from the shellings nor from the miluimnikim, or the people serving at that time. But that's how it happened. As for me, I became an Israeli citizen. I went into the army 6 months later, just at the time that Golda Meir resigns. My military service is uneventful, as was my being called up as a reservist later in the artillery, but that is a whole other story. 6 years go by. I've worked in the orchards, the orange groves, but now I'm a teacher, teaching English in a secondary school close to the Lebanese border. Last slide, please. Sorry, Syrian artillery, I forgot that one. The next one, please, Steve. And the next one. So you can see here where it says regional school. It's further north from where I was living, at a kibbutz called Dafna, very close to the Lebanese border. And to the left circled, you can see Kiryat Shmone. So it's mid-morning at kibbutz Dafna. I'm teaching. And suddenly this time there are Katyusha attacks, rocket attacks from Lebanon on the left there, explosions all around us, and it's back into the shelters. And this time, believe me, I'm scared. Students and teachers all in the shelters. That evening, we drive back to the kibbutz through Kiryat Shmone, a small town, some of you have been there. And it looks like half the town is on fire. We drive through as quickly as we can. There are many more such Katyusha shellings. Luckily, our kibbutz is now out of range, but many other places are not. And just to remind you, or maybe you don't remember, the next war, hardly remembered, happens then. In 1979, it was called Operation Litani, when the IDF went into southern Lebanon after these Katyusha shellings and direct terrorist attacks, culminating in an attack on 2 buses on the coastal road between Haifa and Tel Aviv, when 25 adults and 13 children were murdered. I expected to be called up then, but my unit was allocated to the Sinai. So it did not happen. I was not part of that operation. And a year later, I left Israel for good, though I've visited it with my family many, many times since and still have very close friends there. And that's it. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you have any questions, I'll be very happy to do my best to answer. Thank you.
Everybody unmute. Thanks very much, David. That was brilliant. If everybody's unmuted, let's see.
You don't know on this.
So
you've got questions, David?
Yeah, questions. Somebody's talking about the milking sheds here. Oh, it's Gillian, and she says, I love kibbutz milking sheds. The soporific buzz, the routine. I'd also find it soothing at a turbulent time. But I suppose it must have been traumatic for the cows and affected milk production too. Did you measure milk production in those days, David?
Now, I have to break the news that we didn't really care. Sorry. Look, this is very difficult for you to take in, and it may be very disappointing to you, but cows aren't very intelligent.
Okay, all right. Irene, I know you.
No, there was a war going on, and trust me, we kept it from them. At times, I thought, yeah, maybe they have a right to know, the bovine equality with human beings. Are we discriminating against the dairy cows? But we decided no, they were better off not.
Irene, go on.
If it's not too personal, could you tell us what precipitated your departure from Israel?
Oh, it was very complicated. It's not personal at all. It was partly to do with family. I was on my own. My family was still in Britain. I felt guilty. All my friends at that time were all getting married, and I was thinking, I don't want to be a single ravak, a bachelor on the kibbutz. And fortunately, I'd met a French woman called Diane, who Stephen and Donna know very well. And she happened to like me, which is nothing short of extraordinary. And I left the kibbutz with the intention of staying away for 1 year. And then we got married in the UK and life went on here.
And you just never went back?
On holidays, visiting many, many times. I can add to the story, but there are politics involved, and I don't think it's appropriate to talk politics, because I'm sure there's every political belief regarding Israel's politics under the sun in this room, so I won't go into that side of it. But that was by no means, it wasn't just that. Family as well.
David, how do you think the shelling that you experienced during the Yom Kippur War compares with what people are experiencing coming out of Gaza?
Gosh.
Because you had it for 3 weeks, or just under 3 weeks.
Well,
you've had it for about 10 years now.
More. Are you talking about people in Sderot and so on the Israeli side? I don't think it's comparable, and I'll explain why. Israel, with all its experiences of not continuous war, continuous, for want of a better word, incidents of one sort or another, I'm thinking more of the intifadas, the 2 intifadas, creates a certain mentality where fear, anxiety, think of Saddam Hussein and the long distance shelling of Israel from Iraq way back, I don't even remember when. I can't compare my experience to that. It was brief. I mean, I remember every minute of it, including all sorts of things that weren't appropriate to tell you this evening. not comparable. They're under continuous pressure. It would be presumptuous.
Beth, go on.
David, firstly, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. But I just wanted to know, after your experience there, when you came back to England, were you traumatized by, you know, the sounds and things like that? So I've heard other people who've gone through things like that. Any loud bang or whatever triggers what they've gone through.
No. This is because, as friends of mine will point out, I'm too stupid to take it in properly. No, I think that's a very interesting question, actually, Beth. Very interesting. No, I think that it hasn't happened. It didn't happen. And I'm not going to live my life think about what might have happened, which can be very different for other people. It's such a personal thing.
Did the people that went through that on the kibbutz stay afterwards, or did they like go back to the
It varied enormously. I mean, certainly nobody left straight after the Yom Kippur War. And the kibbutz as such, as a kibbutz, as a communal settlement, no longer exists. Like most kibbutzim, it's been privatized and so on and so forth. The kibbutz movement started to fall apart in the early 80s, I guess. It was a very slow process. I don't know if that's an answer to your question, though.
Yeah.
But no. It didn't work that way. Nobody left the kibbutz or Israel because of the Yom Kippur War. Subsequent wars, I couldn't possibly say. I don't think so, though. It doesn't work that way.
And how have you used your milking talents in the future?
Well.
Do you have a cow in the back garden?
How did you know? I could still do it, though. It's not very useful in Muswell Hill, I have to say. But I'll tell you a story, though. A very good friend of mine, some of you may know him, may not, a guy called Nicky Sigler. Anybody know him there? He was a stalwart of the Labour Party here for many years, came up like I did as the son of a German Jewish refugee. And he went to another kibbutz and was in Habonim. And when he came back to the UK, he missed milking cows. So he went to work for the, I don't know what it's called. Do you know the one by Henley's Corner?
The little farm.
College farm. College farm.
College farm. Thank you, Donna. So he went milking there because he missed it. I didn't have that problem.
The Express Dairy, wasn't it?
It was once, yes, that's right.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I think they still have milk cows there.
They have cows there still.
Yeah. I mean, I could, for a small fee, introduce you to the joys of milking and washing or
Thank you.
no, washing cow dung. No, okay.
Thank you.
No, all right.
As part of our eco,
A question for you from Michael.
as part of our eco synagogue project, I think we could do definitely. We have
Yeah,
to
really cow.
invest in some cows, definitely. Go on, Michael. Sorry.
Go on, Michael.
That was a remarkable memory that you've been telling us about. And yet, fortunately for the people in the kibbutz, the shelling was all that there was, however bad it was. Did it, I mean, it must have occurred to you that there was a risk of actually the kibbutz being overrun by the Syrian army, and what might have happened then?
Yes.
Do you want like the chicken and stuff in the soup?
Oh, lovely.
With
Thank you.
rice?
Yes, lovely.
Let's
Can
sort out.
we all have some too, Irene?
Yeah, I was going to say chicken soup comes first. Sorry, let me think about that one. Sorry, the chicken soup distracted me.
Yeah.
I'm easily.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's all right.
I'm joking. No. Really. Sorry, could you repeat the question, Michael?
Yeah, when all this shelling was going on, which is what you've told us about, was there any significant amount of rational fear that the Syrian army may be doing
yes.
more than shelling and overrunning the kibbutz?
It happened very fast. So you have to bear in mind, one, nobody knew till much later that the advanced Syrian forces got to the upper customs house. I don't know if you're familiar with the geography of the area.
Yeah.
Okay, so as I said, the kibbutz is 3 miles east of the Jordan River, which is the old border.
Excuse me, west, David.
Yes, quite right. Oh gosh. Sorry. Yeah, 3 miles west of the River Jordan, which runs on the north-south line. Okay. On the Syrian side, as was on the Golan Heights, there were two buildings which were built, I think, by the French, because it was in the times of Palestine and Syria that Palestine was under British mandate, and then you cross the border into Syria, which was a French mandate. Okay, so there was the lower customs house, which was just across the River Jordan, and the upper customs house, which was about a mile further up, about a mile further up, where you sort of went up a steep hill and then it flattened out into the Golan Heights, which is more gradual. Bet Meches Elyon. And the advanced Syrian forces got as far as there. But we had no idea at the time, Michael. Yeah, it happened very fast. You know, and the reservists were called up, and did other people, older people who weren't called up, the women on the kibbutz who of course weren't called up, did they talk about this at the time? I don't know. I don't think so. There was a certain, I don't actually know, but there was a degree of stoicism of carrying on and just getting on.
Keep it up. Keep it going up.
Pardon? Yeah. I hope that answers you.
Thanks.
Oh, Rabbi David, and then
Sorry,
you.
I just wanted to tell my my son that Arsenal had scored a third goal. David, that was fascinating, and really, really thank you for sharing. And it just made me wonder, is this something that you tell regularly? Is this a speech that you have told to other groups? It just makes me think of how we often hear those who have gone through Holocaust experiences. And that's obviously a big thing, because obviously those who've gone through the Holocaust are much older, and therefore we worry about losing the ability to actually be with them, experience them in person. But it made me think that also for young people, and I'm looking around here, and I'm including myself, none of us are of the younger generation. All right, Daniel, I'll let you in. But you know, for our children and teenagers, it's, I suppose, important that they hear this traumatic story and what people went through on the borders, the worry that, you know, of being overrun, as Michael said. So have you thought about that? Is that something that you've thought about or have done to actually tell all this story to others? Because I'll be your agent any day, David.
Done. Done. The answer is I've done this once before for an older people's group at Wembley Reform at the instigation of a good friend. And then after I prepared it and delivered the talk, if you will, in a far more stilted fashion, I felt much more comfortable tonight because I've done it before, and I thought, let's try and make it more immediate. And well, that's a long-winded answer of saying I'd be more than happy to do it again. It would be my pleasure. I think that were it for younger people, Rabbi David, it would have to be even more vivid. And the reason I say that, and please disagree, anybody, is that their world of virtual wars on television, in films, and so on and so forth, may be very different. Maybe I'm being unfair there, I don't know. But I'd be more than happy to do it again, and yeah, and have an agent. Yes.
If Stephen doesn't get there first.
Okay, Gillian, if you unmute yourself, you can ask a question. I know you've got something you wanted to ask David.
Yeah, well, a couple of things. Being an avid fan of kibbutz milking sheds and always finding them very comforting. One I asked about, did milk production go down? But don't answer that yet. I just want to share that my sister was on kibbutz Levi at the time, and we were really very scared. And she was writing all these letters as if, you know, that eventually reached us, that you know, they were trying to carry on life almost as normal, but the men weren't there. And so I can really identify with what you're saying. Maybe it was shock, and maybe it was numbness, and they didn't have a full realization of what was going on, or maybe it was stoicism. I don't know. She never disclosed that.
I would go with stoicism to a degree, because
Thank you.
It's a very interesting point, because Lavi, where I've eaten there, was far further away from any danger than we were, but all the reservists had gone off to war, and they were young men who were already in the army, and that's quite something. It should be borne in mind that prior to that, there had been, between 1967 and 1973, there was continuous war. Now, what's that? What do I mean by that? There had been multiple terrorist incursions over the River Jordan. This is forgotten now. And there was Milchemet Hatasha, the war of attrition on the Suez Canal, where the Egyptians were constantly shelling the Israeli positions on this side, so to speak, of the Suez Canal, because Sinai had been taken in 1967. The thing about the war, and I mentioned obliquely Golda Meir resigning, is that it caused at the time in Israel a degree of scandal, that many more soldiers were killed quickly, young Israelis, than had occurred, certainly in the Six-Day War, certainly in the Suez Campaign. Nothing like that had happened since 1948. So I think the shock came later, and the political scandal that Israel had not been prepared, and the intelligence services had warned that something was going to happen, but that had happened before, nothing had actually happened, etc., etc. I think it was all of that came later. But you could ask someone who still lives in Israel, or someone here perhaps who's lived in Israel, you know, might well disagree. But I think the shock came later. Sorry.
Do we have any last question for David before we wrap it up? Okay, in which case, can I ask everybody to unmute and give our customary round of applause to David and thank him very much for his story.
Thank you so much, David. Really helpful. Really great.
Yeah, great.
Nice to hear you.
Thanks, David.
Thank
Good
you.
night, everybody.
Really well delivered.
A last word. A last word. If you ever want to hear about the worst Israeli soldier ever, most incompetent soldier in his regular service, and the exciting stories of my duty in the army in the battlefields of Haifa, I'm your man. Worst soldier ever.
Next one. Next one. Best got into that
Thank you, everyone.
Night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
God bless everyone. Keep well.
Very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
you, Rabbi David.
Oh, pleasure, Malcolm.
Thanks.